Little, and I'm looking, I'm like, okay, it's just kind of. Fine arts.
Fine arts, right.
Okay, that's that. That's fine. All right, so we are picking up there.
Do anything once, much less once.
Close. Cancel. Okay. All right, there's that. All right, I'm gonna have to do this.
I'm sorry.
We are live, we're streaming, and we have audio. So we're listening.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Whoop.
And it's what the others wear on this table.
Microphone is right. Please do my microphone. We're good. The audio is on the computer and the microphone will take everybody.
Okay.
Shoot. Sit there.
Hey, so good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Happy, I think today's Wednesday, so happy Wednesday. We are meeting today just to continue the discussion for our Article 38 with our specialized clinical services group, continuation, or actually, as we settled last year with our contract, this was one article that we know we needed to come back to and have some discussions. And I know that the group met, I believe, in March, where some input was shared and a discussion was held. But as we came to a close with our language discussions at the end of the year, this was one area that was not quite finalized. And so both parties agreed to continue discussions regarding this article. So I know we have an hour for this conversation. It's a busy time of year, but I think it's always a busy time of year, but we do have lots of other events going on this evening as well. So we want to get right started. I don't know if we want to do introductions. Nancy, would you like to do introductions for Linda? I'm sorry, I'm not sure who.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Okay, Paula Texel, HR.
Lori Dart, staff attorney. Nikki Kohler, managing officer of social work.
I'm Donna Sicilian with Student Services.
I'm Christine Everett. I'm a counselor at Palm Harbor Middle.
Rachel Talaber, speech language pathologist at High Point Elementary.
Lindsay Blankenbaker with PCTA.
Nancy Velarde, PCTA. Juliana Stoll, school psychologist with PCTA.
Janice Jablonski, school social worker.
Brian on staff, PCTA.
Beth Kelzer, school climate and behavior social worker.
Lauren Malley, associate superintendent for student and community support services.
I am Lisa Tucker. I'm the supervisor for specialized services, ESE, Lynn Millett, ESC.
Erin Wood, school psychologist.
Elementary, I'm a speech language.
Mary Beth Young, speech language pathologist mentor.
Mary Beth Young, speech language mentor throughout our intermediate, throughout our.
So thank you. That was wonderful to All right, meet so all thank of you. That was wonderful to meet And all of you. so we do have the, so we do have the
list of items
the
that
list
were
of
shared
items
at
that
the-
were
and I
shared
believe
at the,
you
you probably have those as well in front of
I
you.
we are
We are open to however process you want to work. If you want to go through each
top
one,
to the bottom,
top to the bottom, I will kind of maybe,
I will
start off with, I know one of the items that was listed on there was the very last one. In regards to our job descriptions, regarding, I know what the statement was that the staff will have their professional title consistently used or consistently noted throughout the district communications. And I want to let you know that Lisa and I have met again over the last couple of weeks to finalize the job descriptions for the current teacher speech correction to Thank you. Which I just kind of want to let everybody know that this was worked on several years ago, and whatever happened, I'm not going to blame COVID, but whatever might have happened, but I do know I had it prepared, ready to go to the workshop, and then there was a request to pull it back and to have some further discussion, and then I think that is when COVID happened. So just to let everybody know that, but we have done that, and it'll be planning to go to our workshop in September. That is the next workshop. We don't have one in August.
I
So
just want to ask you, Chris, what you handed out, is that the same document?
It's the
as
same,
before?
we just formatted it as a proposal. That's
Okay.
it.
Got it.
okay. So anyways, so we can, so number 10, that has been addressed through the job description and so forth, and has gone through many groups and many people discussions. So thanks, Lisa, on that. So
We wanna
Lindsay,
thank the SLPs for continue to stick with this and addressing it with the group. They've really taken the lead on that. Appreciate everybody in that. All our SLPs and everybody in the department.
Yeah, and they met over the summer with us.
Mhm.
Came on their time off, so thank you, Rachel, and Kim for that.
Thank you.
all right. So Lindsay, I'll just, I don't know if it's if you all want to pick certain ones or what you want, if
Yeah.
it's something more important, I'll kind of let you.
I think that maybe it'd be a good idea because there are some people in the room that haven't that weren't here at the very end of last year, didn't get the chance to see the proposals. So I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to go through the items, and that's okay. And that way our professionals that are here can help give some perspective on those things.
Are you wanting to go through them? What I was asking is, are you wanting to go through them just in order through the sheet, or
I
is there
think so.
something in particular you want to start
No, I
off with?
I think going through in order would work.
Okay,
Um,
no, he's not available.
Okay.
Okay. So I believe, number 1 was just the statement from the agreement. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, number 1 is really just outlining the scope of that article. One of the things that we wanted to edify in this was that our clinicians, our student services professionals and our clinicians are covered by the instructional contract. All the rights, responsibilities that exist in the instructional contract for all of our instructional personnel apply. However, the purpose of this article was to look at some of the specific roles, rights, responsibilities that apply directly to our clinicians to address their unique place in the work that we all do. And so that's really what number 1 does is clarify that while all of our clinicians are included in the larger instructional contract, that there are some specific points that you want to address in Article 38. That's what number 1 does.
and I'll just note the last 2 sentences of that in case, don't know if everybody has it. You know, again, the parties acknowledge and understand that the expertise and role of staff members within the specialized clinical and student services category both reflect and differ from the expertise and role of classroom teachers. And it also states the parties acknowledge and understand that the expertise and role of staff members differ among various categories of specialized clinical and student services personnel. So the number 2 is stating, and I'm going to kind of clarify that this is I was working off the document from March, so I'm just going to make sure that it's pretty much the same, even though I think we said it was. Specialized clinical and student services staff will have a confidential workspace that is private and not shared by any other staff on the same day. So,
Is
Okay.
that something that any of our professionals on the team would want to give some perspective on about the
Doesn't
motivation?
affect me as much as it affects, I would say, Juliana.
And I have been here since day 1, since this began and we first started with the discussions of this. And we sat down, over the years, it has happened, not in all locations, but it has happened that clinicians have had to share spaces. So for example, speech language pathologists might be doing individuals or groups while a school psychologist, social worker, or even a behavior specialist might be working on the other side of the room. And that really does break the confidentiality of services and supports being offered. And so in several of our schools, even now, we have psychologists and social workers who are sharing spaces. And so if there's counseling or if they're seeing students, then there's somebody else in the room with them. I've even had brought to my attention, even just this year, I believe it was a psychologist working with a student in a room that may have held CUME records or other records, and another adult had to walk into that room at that time to get something while private confidential was going on. And so this is just assuring to for addressing that social emotional supports, that clinicians are able to provide that confidential support or therapy services outlined for those students, designated on their IEP as a related service or agreed upon for whatever reason. They're just able to do that in a confidential setting.
Thank you. So number 3.
Well, let's,
Oh, sorry.
let's kind of touch base on,
Okay.
on that. If it's okay, I mean, so that we can have kind of some discussion
Sure.
with that. So, we're looking at this as inserting and putting in contract language. And so when we see things that are already in contract language, we're gonna kind of make sure everybody is aware of that. And so we know in Article 26, it already states that a space shall be provided for all school personnel where confidential conversations shall be held, or may be held, sorry, not shall, may be held.
I'm sorry, what article is that? Article
26F. And so it goes on to include both itinerant staff, and talks about their location a little bit. So we already have language that states that. I hear what you're saying, Juliana, with issues, the example you said about somebody walking in. Well, that should be held accountable, right? That's a process at a school. I even think if somebody had a room where it was confidential, somebody could walk in that's a training, I think, purpose at the school. So I don't know if anybody else has any, I mean, we have the expertise and the people who work with our people here too.
Well, several schools that I've been at and talking to other social workers, they have to share their space with school counselors, school psychologists. And sometimes when we're in our MS Teams meetings with them, the other person is in there as well. And so it's very distracting when, for me, I do clinical supervision. And I'm doing MS Teams, doing clinical supervision, which is a private conversation with that intern, and somebody else is in the room. While we're talking about cases or different things like that. And when asked like, well, can you go to another place? They're like, no. And sometimes they have to pick up their computer and go outside or, try to find a place. And they go, and I don't know if it's just, there's no room in the school or whatever, but that's just not, it's just not okay.
So let me ask, if there's no room in the school, and this provision was in the contract, what would you suggest the school do?
So putting
language in the contract wouldn't solve that problem.
We need to build.
We'd need to build a room, right?
making rooms available, and that's one of the things that.
That's what we'll just.
Making rooms available. I was in a school situation that was very tight a few years ago and had to share an office with the VE specialist at the secondary level, the ESE person. And as I'm trying to pull students to do evaluations or assessments or work with them, she was calling parents and doing IEPs in a room that was 10 by 10. And I was able to work out with that administration, albeit reluctantly, because I kept having to pull the contract and look at it. And on that particular day, I utilized the conference room. And so I was given a designated area, so the conference room. There are other rooms. I'm not saying block my room and my room only, but when doing therapy, I remember not many years ago, there was an elementary school that cubby walls were being used, where an SLP was doing a group on one side of the cubby wall and the behavior specialist was working with the student on the other side of the cubby wall. But the student on the other side of the cubby wall only goes a few feet up. It doesn't go all the way to the ceiling. and the student was in meltdown and was the behavior specialist was working with, and it was very disruptive to the SLP group. So I don't know that we can sit here and say, you know, just asking the schools to look around to find out where that space can be.
But doesn't
So
that say
perhaps it is in a
Yeah.
classroom not being used, perhaps it is a conference room not being used, perhaps it is, but working with.
So Juliana, if I can say, I agree. I mean, obviously, as a planner, I totally get it. And what I really like is I heard you say that you talked to the administrator and you were able to use the conference room. So it's kind of my hope that that is often, I know it's not always, but I'm hoping that's often the situation. And then I hear you saying adding in contract language might not resolve it. So what I'd like to offer is that when you in a situation where you're at a school or somebody you're doing supervision, Janice, and they're on the other line, you're like, who are all those people hearing this, right? So that you would reach out to Mike. Mike's sick, by the way. Mike's sick, by the way. That's why he's not here. He's sick.
Vicky, me,
Mike, whoever. And when you've approached and you didn't have the result you had, even though it was reluctant, it sounds like it happened. So good job. But we would want to step in and help and support that. So
What I love,
Yeah.
Donna, what I love is that the people in this room are the ones that are flexible. The people in this room are the ones that are willing to work with us. That, and we're asking this to be in contract language because we all know that of situations are have been heard. It doesn't always happen that way. And so that's why we're asking for it to be in contract language to help perhaps move in a faster way or not have to have that confrontation with that administrator. That it just is understood no. Because even this year, and I'm looking at Article 26 out. A bit vague, but it is in there. This is a lot more specific. And even with it in under Article 26 out, we're still running into it this year.
Well, what does it say on in 26 exactly?
So
A space shall be provided for all school personnel where confidential conversations may be held. This includes itinerant staff who will be provided an office or class area at their assigned school. And that section was just revised in the
Yes,
contract.
we're aware.
Yeah, okay.
But at the time, I do understand, I don't think we're asking for a specific office that's always held for the person. That's not what they're asking for. Obviously, there has to be some place for them to work, do their paperwork. Doing the paperwork and other things can be done in a shared space, if that's what both people are doing at the time. It's the private conversations that need to have a separate space. Those cannot be happening in a shared office. It doesn't mean that office can never be used by more than one person. I think that's what they're asking for, is an understanding that a private place will be provided by the school for consultations with students or with parents or whoever you're consulting with.
what about something, that's, because I think what I heard you say was, you feel confident maybe the people that are in the room right now would help resolve that, but what, because like I did like what if we're not? So what if something was added that just said, you know, when this is an issue, that the administrators will work with school administrators to resolve, or something like, you know, so that it's in the language that we, you know, whoever it is that has the roles that some of us have now, that they would help resolve. So you already have the article, and we're just saying something like, when we reach an impasse, we'll involve, you know, the district level administrators to help resolve the, you know, the district level.
And this
administrators
sentence is actually a shorter version of exactly what you're saying. That's, and this does say on the same day, maybe we clear it up and say at the same time, okay? That maybe that needs to be clarified just a little bit, just during that time period allotted for that there be that they have confidentiality. And so basically, this is saying what you're saying. But very as succinctly as possible, that the specialized clinical student services staff will have a confidential workspace that is private and not shared by any other staff. You know, during that time of student service, during that time of whatever.
I'm just
So,
saying like what already exists, just something that says like a resolution will be, you know, that districts that will help reach a resolution when we're needed or something. Because I read that to say something I'm concerned we really honestly couldn't provide. We don't want to agree to something that we can't, which is that there'll be a confidential, private workspace like
A
on
room.
going.
I just know, like, when I go to my doctor's office, I'm not sitting in a exam room with another patient. That's what I'm equating this to. And so when
Kind of against the wall.
when I go to see a physician or a counselor in private practice, I'm in a room with no one else except that person I'm seeing.
And I think that's really where, and Donna, I hear what you're saying. But I think that the expectation would be, the general expectation of the contract is that under, when necessary, turn to district administration to intercede, I guess. And if that doesn't, if that doesn't reach resolution, then there's contractual remedies for that. Two things I think that, and we'll see this throughout. Like Juliana said, and Nancy said, providing these confidential services is part of the job description. And as long as we don't have the conditions that allow our clinicians to do their job as they're expected to, that's an issue for their employment. I think also, one of the things that we'll talk about throughout is our clinicians, particularly those who are itinerant, are in a very unique position. And I think they're viewed very uniquely on campuses. Too often, they are, because they're non-classroom personnel, too often they're seen as sort of the filler. Let's look at the classroom, the classrooms, make sure those are set, which of course nobody's arguing with, and we'll figure out what to do with the clinicians. Whether that is, and we'll talk more about this later, but whether that's pulling them for extra duty or proctoring or so forth, whether that's putting them in whatever space we have available. What this and all other parts of this proposal are meant to do is to make the consideration of our clinicians part of the planning, to remove that element of, we'll see what happens from it, and establish the expectation that they're going to be regarded this way, that they're going to be scheduled, that the space is going to be planned this way, and put that responsibility behind it, so that on an individual basis, our clinicians are not having to sort of plead for that consideration, that's the expectation rather than what's seen as a special request or some sort of exception. I think that's really the goal of this and so many of the other parts of the article. So that's just something I'd like for us to consider as we move through all of them. Do we want to keep moving to and try to get through some additional points? Okay. For number 3, and actually 3 and 4. These are very, very similar to language that already exists in the instructional contract. The clinicians, and just for brevity's sake, I'm going to say clinicians, daily schedule will include a 30-minute lunch period. That's no different from all of our instructional personnel. Number 4, they will have uninterrupted planning, equivalent to that of their grade level served, of that of classroom instructional employees at their grade level served. Again, matches what is available to all of our instructional personnel. The difference is based on the consideration that is often extended to our clinicians, which is that time is up for grabs because there's not a classroom full of kids moving in before it and a classroom full of kids moving out of it or moving after it. This affords professional autonomy, professional discretion to the clinicians to schedule those, times. And also to build into the contract, protection around that time, so it is not considered to be, and I'm using sort of an abbreviated a shorthand version of it's not seen as up for grabs. Certainly not suggesting that this is malicious on the part of any of district administrators, site-based administrators. It's not that, but we're all educators. We know that student supervision, student safety is at the forefront of our minds, and it's very easy to fall back, perhaps easier than other solutions, to fall back on that time is flexible. But that when we take away that time, it's coming from somewhere. It's coming in from the clinician's ability to do their jobs the way that they're expected to do, the way that their certifications require them to do. And so the addition that we built into 3 and 4 clarifies that they have that same right as all of our instructional personnel, but that there is additional protection around it, specific to their professional autonomy to schedule. So for example, that's not necessarily to say that a clinician could come in and say, I'm going to take 15 minutes of lunch at the beginning of the day and 15 minutes of lunch at the end of the day, and that's my schedule for the whole rest of the year. It's certainly not to disregard the needs of the site, the needs of the students in setting the master schedule. But so frequently our clinicians are required to work through their lunch because they're responding to a crisis or they have an evaluation to work through. And that would come down to them saying, okay, I worked through, which is what I needed to do in the moment, but now I'm going to schedule that break at another time. And that time is still carved out. It's just been moved around to afford some flexibility to the situation at hand. But that's up to the professional discretion of the clinician. Did anybody else want to speak to that? I know we've talked about some of the examples.
Well, as a school counselor, we're on site 5 days a week, our itinerants are not, and they're there 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and stuff like that. So I can tell you as a school counselor and many school counselors that because we are there 5 days a week, we are able to take a lunch, and that's not a problem and stuff. But the planning period that goes along with it, we don't take a planning period because we have to be available 24/7. And it's not that it's a problem. We are always going to respond to a crisis when there is one, but I feel that sometimes I feel like our administration wants us available 24/7. And that's a little bit of an issue for school counselors. It's been an issue at my school through last year. So that is why I feel strongly, advocating for school counselors with that piece, because we do, of course, get to take a lunch, and we do take a lunch, but there are times that they try to interrupt us for other stuff as well, because there's things going on.
So Chris, there is a contractual right to planning and a lunch, so I'm unclear on saying it again would change anything. Do you go to your supervisor when that happens, or do you hear from complaints? I mean, from them. That would be a problem if you are always deprived of a lunch or a planning time. So restating it, I'm not sure that's solving an issue.
I feel like this article is to protect us separately, because we are, we're non-instructional, but people constantly think I'm an administrator at my school.
You're instructional, not classroom.
Instructional.
Right, but people think I'm an administrator. Like it's odd to me that people don't exactly know what I do for my job. So,
and you think that this sentence is going to change that?
It's not that the sentence is going to change that. It's that I want it to be clear to administration, because I had a very difficult time the last couple of years. I want to be clear to administration that that we are entitled to these things as other instructional staff. And as much as it said it in the previous article, it was not followed.
But saying it again would change it? That's my point.
Yes, actually, I do believe that it will, because it is specific, because then we can open up the book and say, but
You can open up the book
look.
right now and say that though.
Still run into some challenges on that.
You actually said in your example, you said, so I got the contract and I went and talked, and then you got your, so.
I'm not the only one, though. I'm representing
I'm just
others,
repeating it.
and they are running into some of those challenges. And just because I was able to and it worked for me, it did not work for others in those situations. And they are feeling like if they say no to their administrator, that
They're being told they're not team players. they're being told, you're not part of the team if you don't do this. When you're told that, it makes you not fight back. And it needs to be clear to administrators that even as part of the team, they are entitled to this time, and they have to schedule it, that they have to decide when in the day it works best. A classroom teacher doesn't get that option
No.
because we have a schedule
Correct.
with our kids, and we don't need it because we're not pulled willy-nilly at other times. For the most part. For the most part.
Yeah, I think some classroom teachers would say that they are too, but yeah.
But,
In those special circumstances.
but absolutely, the clinicians are seen as being different because they don't have set classes. And they believe that free time is available for use of multiple things. Now, as Christine said, as anyone said,
I think we recognize
they're gonna
the
respond to a crisis no matter what time of day it is. But to be pulled to do duty or to I don't know, proctor a test or do, that is what's been happening. That's not acceptable. That wouldn't happen to a teacher on a regular basis. It is happening to them on a regular basis.
So, and I think we said right off the bat that even in this group, there are very differences, because I'm seeing some people going, I know some of ours have a very tight schedule,
Right.
like they don't have, but counselors, and we've had this discussion, I don't think with either of you, but we've had this discussion years ago where you don't have a schedule through the day, like an SLP, and yes, right? So, and that gives some flexibility, and that gives some difference. My job is, well, it is pretty much filled with meetings, but I have a little bit more flexibility than I was when I was a classroom teacher, just like Nancy, we had our schedule, but counselors are very different. And the idea that you work through other times so that you can take a little time, it is the flexibility of it. We could have a schedule all day long for you, backed up with a planning period in there, but we recognize that's not fit your needs of your position. And so the 1 to 1:30, 1 to 1:40 planning time might not always fit for you. Just like in an SLP, I guarantee you they're probably not every single day because of the schedule of your children you're working with, right? And the grade levels. So we've had this, we've kind of talked about the counselors before, and this was years ago. And everybody is a little different. But again, I'm going to go back to, it is in the contract. And I understand this is a special, like another way to say it, but we have it in there already. You are guaranteed this, you are given this time. And again, I think everything we're hearing, if you are not getting what is in the contract, we need to take it. And if your administrator is not listening, then you have supervisors that can step in and can assist with that.
If I may interrupt, I think the difference, and this has been mentioned, but I just want to reiterate that the difference here between the contract language that already exists and the proposal here is the scheduled by the staff member, which puts the autonomy and puts the power back in the hands of our clinician, so that they are not waiting for permission or waiting for release to go ahead and get their time that they're contractually entitled to. It removes the confrontation when the expectation is that the clinician will, if they need to work through or they have some sort of unforeseen circumstance, in the same way that we see on the classroom instructional side, on perhaps fewer occasions, but we see that sometimes, putting it back in their hands and saying, I had to work through, but this is when I'm going to do my planning time, and this is what I'm going to do lunch. And that, putting that discretion back in the hands of the clinician is where this is distinguished from the language that already exists. It also removes any potential conflict that could arise, as we've stated, that there tends to be a different way of looking at our clinicians, particularly our itinerant clinicians when on campus. This again helps to preserve that autonomy and treats them as though they have the same expectation of respect for their schedule that anybody would have. That's the distinction.
So if the supervisor and the staff member established a schedule so that it was fixed as a time frame and would only be interrupted in emergency type circumstances, right? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know that that's necessarily the way that it always works. I think that there is because again, it
I'm
might
looking
be,
at a way that we can understand that it's set in a schedule so that everybody knows this is when Christine would take her planning time or her lunch. But the supervisor would have to have some agreement, and whether you set it for a 9-week period or however you establish your schedule, you know that that's essentially a time that's yours and you're not going to be pulled out unless there's some emergency. That's what you're looking for, right?
yes. But again, I think that's part of the story. But then the other part of it is acknowledging, so as an example for our counselors. So you've got classroom counseling, right? Working at sort of more on the instructional, our SEL responsibilities that fall under the career SEL that fall to our counselors. That is going to be, I think, a little more beholden to a set schedule because you're following the set schedule of a classroom, right? Or a particular grade level or whatever it is. However, the counseling, the one-on-one counseling, and that might be something that the counselors would have in common with our SLPs, our psychs or social workers, specific individual work with students. Of course, that's going to have to be subject to the needs of the students, and that ultimately determining that is at the discretion of the clinician. What we want to do is shift the discretion to the clinician in saying, yes, we can work together to have a general expectation of when planning time is, when lunch time is. I don't think that that's unreasonable, but that what distinguishes this from the previous language, or rather the existing language, is that ultimately it comes down to the discretion of the clinician, what they need to be doing at what time. And that this gives that discretion or preserves that autonomy for the clinicians in these particular respects. We're going to talk a little bit about duty as well, and there's some common thread there.
So you don't want a schedule assigned to counselors for lunch or planning. They
No.
take it.
No, it says, I mean, it actually says,
I'm trying to define what that
I get what you're
scheduled by the staff member. Are you saying scheduled by the staff member on a daily basis? On an
no,
hourly basis?
I don't think so. I think that I do think that it
No,
probably would end up being more than, depending on the role and depending on the individual job description, it could be that flexibility in that schedule is more frequent in some circumstances than others. Is it completely unreasonable to have an expectation that in general our counselor is going to go to lunch at this particular time? No, I don't think that's completely unreasonable, or that person's planning time or uninterrupted planning time is going to be at a particular time. I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't think any of our clinicians would suggest that. However, that ultimately that discretion for when that's going to happen, and if it does need to be interrupted for the needs of the students, that the rescheduling of that time, the adjustment of that time is going to come down to the autonomy and the discretion of the professional, of the clinician.
For example,
That's
the way I'm seeing it is that, let's say in general, the lunch is understood to be at 11:30. Okay, in general, or the planning at a certain time. Certainly, if the counselor or any of these people are meeting with the child and it runs into, you're not going to stop the child and say, well, it's my lunchtime. Crisis resume in a half hour. That's not realistic. So of course, you're just going to keep going. You're going to work. You're going to do it, and then you are going to the point is that the professional gets to say, I'm going to do my lunch at the end of the day, or I'm going to do my lunch in an hour as soon as this is done, or whatever. Make it without having to check with somebody, without having to report that to somebody, or wait for permission to do that. I think that's the difference, because they have to be trusted to know when they can or cannot stop a session, or schedule a session. If a child needs emergency, comes in with an emergency, they need to schedule that session right there. They just need to be able to manipulate their day from day to day as needed. You can have a general idea in mind that if there are no crises and everything goes according to schedule, this will be my lunch, you know.
This will
yes, I
be
will do
my
lunch
lunch, you know,
at
yes,
whatever
I will
time
do my lunch at
they
whatever
agree
time
to.
they
But it
agree
has to be
to.
understood
But
that
it
this
has
is,
to be
that's
understood
just
that
not
this
the kind
is,
of job
it's
they
just
have.
not the kind of
That
job
it
they
just
have.
goes according
That
to
it just
schedule.
goes
And
according to schedule.
this is
And
saying that they do
this
get
is
to make
saying
those
that they
decisions
make those
without
decisions
waiting for
without waiting for
permission
permission.
to move their day around.
Is that
Their day around.
Is that the expectation from the people that, I know, I don't think our therapists have that because they have.
My
schedule.
question is.
But my question is to psych and social workers, are you, and guidance counselors, are you then go, right now, feel like you have to go get permission to have lunch if your session goes over? I would think the expectation already is that.
No, we're not gonna end this until
It's different in different settings, and perhaps for some of us, we are able to have that because we built that rapport with our administration. However, first year, sometime coming into a school, our assignments get changed, we're itinerant, we're there. And, this is how the psychologist did it last year, this is how social worker did it last year, or this is how it was done. Or we need this done at this time, and
we need this done at this
last year, I'm
and
just gonna throw this out for an example.
Last year, I'm
We
just
were
gonna
thrown
sound
for
for
a pretty big
example.
loop last year with the whole sudden evaluations of all the FSAA, MMI, and suddenly the reprioritization of how our world went. And I may have had groups set up, I may have had things set up, I may have had, and suddenly all that had to be reprioritized. And it was a bit of, even with the communication with my administration at my school, we didn't quite connect on it for quite a few weeks when I finally had to just simply take all of my files and set them down on the desk and say, then tell me what you don't want me to do. If I'm being pulled to proctor all day long for the SAT, and I'm only in the school as my itinerant, and I've got all these kids to evaluate, that if you feel that is priority one in my work, then what am I not going to be doing? And in so doing, proctoring that SAT that whole day, I didn't get a planning period that day. The teachers that we're proctoring, we're done in time for their planning period. I'm given a one-on-one. Okay, and so does this come up all the time? No, but when it does come up,
but when it does come up,
and we don't know,
what's coming
and things change constantly. We have resignations within the district, and suddenly, as an itinerant, I'm covering two high schools with a 1:4,000 ratio. Between my two high schools, having to prioritize what is best, losing days at both high schools. Not a very good way to meet the needs of our students. Unfortunately, we have resignations, we have openings. It's out a bit of my supervisor's hands because the coverage has to be done. Same thing with the social workers or the SLPs, there's a resignation, so suddenly we're breaking up their load. FTE week is upon us, and we have to then, these evaluations that we're, everything has to be met, and so suddenly of having a bit of professional autonomy and respect to be able to say, these are some priorities that I have. And sometimes as itinerants, as a 28-year veteran school psychologist, not the only district I've run into this on, y'all may be surprised about this, but sometimes administration doesn't always understand what we do. Those of us sitting in here in this room understand what we do. They understand, but we don't, but it's not always understood. And so having it in writing to say, look, this is our professional. This is our professional autonomy. This time is needed, that I don't have to write a dissertation independent.
But it is in the contract, so that's why that's why I'm confused if it's in the
Because
contract.
often,
And then I come again with it, because if they're not following the contract, they're not following the contract. That's what confuses me, is that it's already in here once, I've got it again. in case you didn't get it the first time, but if you've got an administrator, that's why, you know, and I understand that, you know, you can go to Mike and he's gonna support you. And I hope that my team knows that I 100% would support them in any question. I understand from this side too, is that just putting it in again, the therapists do design their own schedule. There's no one on my team, that the administration does their schedule for them.
I've also been told, oh, that's for teachers. Oh, that's for teachers. And I've been contacted by, as a lead rep, I've been contacted by others within my department. And they're saying,
Okay, I have said this so many times on all through last year with the open book bargaining. The point of a contract is to make clear to both sides what the responsibilities are. Both sides benefit so that there can't be people who react differently to it. It will minimize confrontation. It will minimize the number of times somebody has to ask permission or explain things. The more clear your language is in a contract, the fewer disagreements or problems arise. That is the whole point of having a contract. It holds both parties responsible to the contract. I think unfortunately, having this language, which is just slightly different than what the classroom teacher has elsewhere in the contract. I think having this will completely alleviate any misunderstanding that these people are, yes, instructional and covered by the contract, but also have a very different type of job that has a different kind of day, and they have more control over how that day looks. Because it may differ from day to day, where I don't think teachers need that. And teachers don't need that in the same way, because we basically know period 1, period 2, period 3, period 4, lunch, period, dining. We know what the day is going to look like. We don't move that around and say, I'm gonna have lunch later today. Lots of luck, kids, you know, I'll see you, come meet me outside. Because we don't need to. We don't need to. I mean, rarely is there, if there's a crisis in my classroom, and there have been many, it's these people I'm reaching out to. It's gonna either be the counselor or the social worker or the psychologist or whoever is on staff available to me on that day. That's who I'm gonna be reaching out to. I don't have to change my schedule, but I may have to make them change their schedule because, oops, I need you now. This child needs you.
Lynn wanted to say
I've been, trying to listen and trying to understand and, think about like, what is the solution, because I think that what I'm hearing and what I've experienced on both, at the school level and at a district level is that we are, we try to, we're using a contract, I guess, if you will, that is instructional in nature, and it really follows those instructional rules. And so when you do that and you're thinking of it from a traditional instructional framework, I guess is the best word to describe it. I'm not sure the better word, but that is much more linear, I guess, in nature, right? So what you all do is not linear. It's much more clinical. For the most part, the majority of people that are in this group are doing a more it is a different type of service for our students and schools. So I guess I wonder if the instructional contract is really the right contract, or if it should be more of a professional technical kind of contract. And I'm only saying that because I wonder if some of the things that are more challenging to understand or to delineate are because of the type of work that you do. If you were in a if you were in a clinical setting, many of the individuals that are in this group, if you're in a clinical setting, it is, you know, very often that you're seeing students throughout the day. You are creating your schedule. You are determining when you need to be flexible because you have that emergency that's coming in. And I'm just thinking about it because, you know, I also know that there's Medicaid billing built into all of this and other components. And so, and I don't know that I'm saying the right thing or I have the right answer, but I do wonder if it was a professional technical contract, if that creates more, if it's not more aligned to what you're talking about, because, you know, you're saying that you're instructional, but your duties and roles are different from an instructional provider. And I get that because obviously I have a bunch of you all in my department, which I love. It's great.
And it fits
but
with
I
the professional certification. and
Right,
licensure that's
right.
different than teacher certification.
Right.
So I agree with that too.
And so, you know, and I think about it because, you know, and we have a whole group of board certified behavior analysts. That's a direction that we've been moving this year, well, the past couple of years. And it made more sense based on their licensure and the type of duties that they perform to have them to create their job descriptions under a professional technical job description. So I don't know, maybe that's something that we need to have further conversation about. Maybe that makes more sense. Maybe that allows us to create job descriptions that are much more specific in nature to the types of duties that you perform, and the fact that along with all of those duties, you have to maintain licensure, you have, you know, there's Medicaid billing requirements, there's other components that are built into that. So, you know, that's just my thinking and just a suggestion that I thought I might.
So I
throw
think
out
that
there.
I want to draw us back based on Lynn, what you're saying. If you go back to the first point in the article, it does that. It says that, and this is our intention to say that these professionals, these clinicians are covered under the instructional contract. They are protected, claiming time, everything else in the instructional contract. But in the way that their job description differs from that of a classroom teacher, we're going to outline these points to address those pieces. It doesn't require an entirely different contract because they do fall under that umbrella of working directly with students in the instructional setting. This first paragraph, and this was, you know, very carefully crafted before I was here, very carefully crafted to do that, exactly that, to acknowledge our clinicians' place within the instructional contract, but then to go even further to address the ways in which their job descriptions differ. I don't think that it does require an entirely separate contract because you basically be cutting and pasting everything from the rest of the instructional contract and adding these pieces. And that's what this article does. So I think that if what you're suggesting is not, I don't think it's completely off base, but it's accomplished in this article.
I think it clearly delineates though between being a teacher and being a professional. You'd be on the professional side and seen as that. And I think that's what I'm hearing from this group is they don't see me as a professional that I am. I'm a speech language pathologist. I'm an occupational therapist. You know, I am not a teacher. Don't ask me to cover that class because I'm not a teacher. I'm a professional with a certification and licensure. So I think that's why I think that Lynn said that about looking at the PTS scale makes a little more, you know, that side makes more sense and that they are professional.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. However, I don't think, and I have in my experience, I've seen salary scales that make a differentiation that some of our clinicians are on a particular, or not here. That some of the clinicians are on a particular scale. And that's recognized that, you know, they didn't have the same advanced degrees, supplements and so forth. There's reasons why that was in place. But this is none of this. And I want to make this very clear because as we have people in the room, there's people watching as well. None of this is to suggest that somehow our clinicians are professionals
And
in
the teachers are not.
and that are, and other instructional
No,
personnel
no,
are
no.
not.
I know that's not what you
Right,
meant.
They're
right.
instructional, there's a difference between instructional.
But actually, under the contract, there's not. They are all instructional personnel.
But that's
They
what I keep
serve our
hearing.
students, they serve our students in the instructional setting, and they all have different roles, as our classroom teachers do. You might see similar differentiation, or well, maybe not totally similar differentiation, but related between grade levels. And there are places in the contract where we have said, you know, these general protections apply to classroom, to all instructional personnel. It's the vast majority of which are classroom teachers. However, we need to, in this particular place, even though they all have the same rights, differentiate. I can think specifically of payment for coverage that we worked on last year, that this is the way this looks at the elementary level. This is the way this looks at the, at the high school level. This is similar. It's saying these general protections apply because every professional has a role, a critical role to play on campus with students. However, in the context in which those roles differ, here's how we're going to specifically address it. And this article, we believe, accomplishes that.
So I want to be able to move through.
Yeah, I
again,
do know that you
Sure.
have, you're going, got the listen and learn this
I
evening.
might or might not make it now. I'm not sure yet.
I mean, I know you did say 5
Yeah,
o'clock.
yeah,
was
we
it?
did. So, and I'm gonna, let me kind of just, before we move off of 4, and I know Nancy, you had mentioned, and I'm all about making things clear because trust me, you deal with it. I deal with it probably more than anybody in the room. Just about interpreting. I will tell you, I've tried to get an answer on what scheduled by the staff member means, and that was even not even answered to me. It's scheduled by the staff member. I could look at, you could tell me I want my lunch every day at 12 and I want my planning every day at 1. That's not really what you said. Well, maybe not. So again, I want to make sure that there's still interpretation going on, even in what we think might be the clarifying language. So I don't know if we want to move forward
for things like counter proposals.
Oh, sure,
Just
absolutely.
clarify, yeah.
Yeah.
If you feel like it
Absolutely.
needs clarification, absolutely, we can discuss that.
Yeah,
But I do
absolutely,
think it's
but
important to note where there is differentiation between existing language and the language that's been proposed.
Oh, no, I'm sure. I'm just saying that you had proposed this, and I'm just saying even the proposal is not clarifying, as Nancy had pointed out before. So do we want to pause at this point now? Because I think if we get into something else, it will start another.
I actually think this is a really good place to pause because the
Okay.
next couple of items are specific to duty, and there's obviously a lot of discussion.
Excuse me.
Duty. and
Sure.
playing time.
Okay, all right.
So do you want to try to schedule another time, just me and you try to find something and then see
That'd
if
be
we
great.
can get everybody in
That'd be
for
great.
the next meeting of this.
Yep.
April 22nd, we're still meeting for the salary.
August.
Yeah, April. Oh, let's take a break. I think we all need to
Let's take a brief
So we're gonna wait till April and
Our,
still get it done.
You're thinking that we've only been out of bargaining since April. That's what's making you.
Yes, that's probably it. It feels like, yes, this is never ending. So, yeah, so August 22nd, we will be back
are
to the
meeting-
table for the
we are meeting on the
salary
22nd. You are
Correct.
ready to meet? Okay,
and so we'll just come up with another date and then
Okay.
I'll get in touch with
That
everybody.
way
Is
I
that
can look
cool
at
with everybody?
calendars. All right. Thank you.
I appreciate.
Thank you.
There's a lot of people that have come to the table on this and have come to observe, and that is awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
we
you for
really
taking
do
the time. Thank you
appreciate,
to the team for
because
making
this
time.
does need a lot of everybody's input.
Absolutely.
Right. We agree.
Absolutely.
We agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you excited not to?
Right.
Do you have to come?